A man worth an estimated £250 million just made 140 falls in an entire year. Not per week, not per month. £144 for 12 months of 7-day weeks on 1,000 acres. And he's not even the one losing the most. Somewhere out there right now, a real farming family is looking at that same number and wondering if this is the year the bank finally takes the land their great-grandfather cleared by hand. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why the most expensive show Amazon has ever made is losing to 2 blokes, a dog, and a farm that barely turns a profit, and why the joke stopped being funny a long time ago. Amazon Studios has poured what's reported to be hundreds of millions of pounds into glossy, effects-heavy prestige television. Rings of Power alone reportedly swallowed a budget large enough to fund a small nation's road network. And yet, quietly, consistently, the show that keeps topping the charts, winning the awards, and actually making people feel something isn't the one with the dragons. It's a documentary about a middle-aged television presenter who bought a farm, mostly, by his own admission, for the tax breaks, and then decided, for reasons nobody has ever fully explained, to run the entire 1,000-acre operation himself. That show is Clarkson's Farm. And if you...
Thank you, everybody. Should explain I'm on Manjaro. My trousers are falling down. I mean, way harder than anyone in this room. And I do mean that. Go and have a drink. Hello, everybody.
Has mocked and taunted and abused me for my, what he claims anyway, lack of farming knowledge and skill. Well, I mean, you farmed this farm, haven't you?
Yeah, I farmed this farm.
They fall in love with somebody they can recognize, somebody making the exact same mistakes they'd make in a job most of us couldn't survive a single week doing. Jeremy Clarkson didn't set out to become a farmer. He was, by his own account, tired of the grind of the Grand Tour and looking for something new. Diddley Squat Farm in Oxfordshire was supposed to be a quiet, low-effort asset. Instead, in typical Clarkson fashion, he decided that ploughing fields and raising livestock couldn't possibly be that difficult, and threw himself in head first with zero training, zero experience, and, as episode 1 made abundantly clear, zero idea what he was doing. What could have been a vanity project instead became something genuinely rare. A documentary where the main character is allowed to fail, repeatedly, on camera, and the show never cuts away from the humiliation. He rolls tractors he shouldn't be driving. He plants crops in the wrong season. He argues with sheep and loses. And somehow, across 5 seasons now, you watch a genuinely incompetent man slowly, painfully, turn into someone who might actually deserve the word farmer. Because here's the thing, this isn't a finished story. Season 5, which landed on Prime Video in June 2026, opened with Clarkson dealing with a serious health scare that put him under doctor's orders to slow down. Rest, obviously, was never really on the table. Instead, the season pushed the farm toward laser-scanned fields and robot tractors, sent a bewildered Caleb on his first ever trip abroad to see cutting-edge Dutch farms, and dropped the added gut punch of a bovine tuberculosis outbreak that locked the farm out of buying or selling cattle for 2 months. This is a man who has openly admitted that the money from the show itself is one of the only things keeping the farm alive. Let that sit for a second before we go any further. Think about the layers in that admission. A man who made his fortune presenting one of the most successful car shows in television history is telling you, on camera, that without the show he's currently filming, the farm underneath it would not survive. It's not a metaphor, it's the actual business model. The entertainment is subsidizing the agriculture, which means the moment people stop watching, the farm stops existing in its current form. That's not a plot twist writers invented for drama. That's just what farming economics look like in this country in 2026, even for someone with every advantage money can buy. And it hasn't been a straight line of improvement either. Earlier seasons showed him solo running the place while Caleb was away, and Lisa was building out new business ventures, and it nearly broke him. Derelict buildings, weather disasters, licensing nightmares, one crisis stacked directly on top of the last one. If anything, the show has gotten harder to make, not easier, the longer it's gone on. Success didn't smooth the path. It just meant more people were watching him stumble. None of this works without the people around him, though. Caleb Cooper is the beating heart of the whole thing, a young farm manager who's been living this life since before he could walk, permanently exasperated by Clarkson's terrible ideas, and occasionally, grudgingly impressed by the ones that actually work. They are, on paper, the most mismatched double act in television. The man who thinks horsepower solves everything, and the man who's watched horsepower solve nothing his entire life. And yet somewhere across 5 seasons, underneath all the shouting, a real friendship formed. Then there's Gerald, the dry stone waller who communicates in a dialect so thick that Clarkson himself needs subtitles half the time, and who requires absolutely no further explanation because he simply is. There's Charlie Ireland, the long-suffering accountant tasked with the impossible job of keeping Clarkson solvent while the government's paperwork tries to bury him alive. And there's Lisa Hogan, Clarkson's partner, who's evolved from background presence into a driving force behind the farm shop and the restaurant side of the business. Proof that this operation only survives because more than one person is holding it together. Even the royal family has clocked what this show has become. Prince William made a point of visiting Diddley Squat to highlight mental health support for young farmers, and reportedly told Caleb that his own son is a fan of the show. When the future King of England is using your farming documentary to talk about mental health in agriculture, you've stopped making a comedy. You've made something that matters. And that ensemble is exactly why the show survives its own tonal whiplash. One minute you're watching Gerald mutter something nobody in the room can decipher, and the next you're watching Charlie try to explain a piece of tax legislation that could genuinely end the business. Most shows would collapse under that kind of shift. This one uses the comedy as a pressure valve, so that by the time the serious stuff lands, you're already invested enough in these people to feel it properly instead of switching off. And that's really the engine underneath all the jokes. Clarkson's farm keeps quietly showing you exactly how brutal and unforgiving British farming actually is. One bad harvest, one disease outbreak, one tax change. That's the entire margin most farming families are working with, and it can end a business that's survived 4 or 5 generations. Clarkson can absorb a year that nets £104 in profit because he has the grand tour money and the show's own earnings behind him. Most farmers cannot. That's the quiet horror sitting underneath every laugh line. This isn't a farm pretending to struggle for entertainment. The numbers are real, and thousands of families across the country are living inside a far worse version of them, without a camera crew or a backup income to soften the blow. And then there's the bureaucracy. Every single attempt to diversify, the farm shop, the derelict pub renovation, new crops, new buildings, runs straight into a wall of planning rejections, licensing delays, and local officials who seem almost designed to slow innovation to a crawl. Watching this show will make you furious at local government in a way almost nothing else on television manages, because it isn't exaggerated for drama. It's just what happens when you try to modernize a centuries-old industry inside a planning system built for something else entirely. Every farmer watching this show at home recognizes that frustration instantly because they've lived it without a camera crew to make it entertaining. The difference is that when it happens to Clarkson, millions of people who've never set foot on a working farm suddenly get a front row seat to exactly how much red tape stands between a farmer and simply trying to survive a bad year. That's the accidental public service buried inside all the shouting matches with planning officers, an entire audience learning, one rejected application at a time, just how stacked the system really is. But Season 5 raised the stakes past anything the earlier years dealt with, because this time the threat wasn't a nosy council officer, it was Westminster itself. The show leaned directly into the government's changes to inheritance tax relief on farmland, a policy shift that sparked genuine protests from farmers across the country, protests that Clarkson himself was filmed joining in London. Season 4 had already ended on a pointed cliffhanger involving the Chancellor. Season 5 picked that thread up and ran with it, framing an entire season around a government budget that, according to reporting from Farmers Guardian, sent shockwaves through the whole UK farming community. This is where the show stops being a comfort watch and becomes something closer to advocacy without ever announcing itself as such. Farmers have said publicly that Clarkson's platform may be doing more to explain the real-world impact of these tax changes to the general public than any government statement or news segment has managed. A man who bought a farm as a tax dodge has, almost by accident, become one of the loudest voices defending an industry he wasn't even part of a few years ago. There's a real irony sitting inside that, one the show never quite says out loud, but doesn't need to. The exact same tax planning that got Clarkson into farming in the first place is now the thing he's publicly campaigning against, on behalf of families who never had his resources to begin with. It's not a clean, heroic arc. It's messier than that, and more interesting for it. A wealthy outsider stumbling into genuine solidarity with an industry that, 5 years ago, he understood almost nothing about. And then, right when you think the show couldn't get heavier, it does. Reports around the Season 5 finale confirmed that Clarkson was dealing with a cancer diagnosis during filming, a detail the show folded into its most emotional episodes yet. Suddenly the stakes of "will the farm survive" become inseparable from "will the man survive," and every earlier joke about him being reckless with tractors and livestock sits a little differently in hindsight. Here's the uncomfortable part nobody really wants to say out loud. Clarkson has openly said filming would pause after Season 5, and that it would probably be the last unless he finds a good enough reason to keep going. Farming communities have already voiced real concern about what happens if this show simply stops, because for a lot of viewers outside the industry, this is the only window they've ever had into what modern farming actually costs, physically, financially, and now, apparently, medically. So the question this show quietly asks, underneath every tractor crash and every argument with Caleb, is this: what happens to an entire industry's public image the moment the cameras stop rolling? Because right now, one aging TV presenter with a bad hip and a worse business plan is doing more to make people care about British farming than most of the actual institutions built to protect it. Farming groups have said as much themselves, that this show has built alliances for the industry across the UK, the US, and beyond, connecting people to how their food actually gets to the table in a way that press releases and campaign statements simply never have. That's an enormous amount of weight for a program that started life as a light-hearted look at a celebrity failing at ploughing a field. Nobody involved planned for it to become this important. It just did. So back to where we started. A quarter billionaire made £144 in a year, and that's not the punchline. It's the whole point. If a man with his resources, his fame, and his television money can barely keep a 1,000-acre farm above water, ask yourself what that means for the family 2 fields over with none of that safety net. That's why this show keeps winning against shows with 100 times the budget. It's not the tractors, and it's not the swearing. It's that it's the only thing on television actually telling the truth about what it costs to feed this country. If you want more of this, the real stories behind Clarkson's farm, the farming policy fights nobody else is covering properly, and the moments the headlines skip, hit subscribe on Britain's Exposed, turn the notification bell on, and drop a comment telling me which storyline from Season 5 hit you hardest. I read every single one. See you in the next video.